With its 2019 acquisition by Sony, Insomniac Games brought its quarter-century run as an independent studio to a close, signaling a new chapter in the company's storied history. That story didn't begin with the bang you might think it did, though, as, believe it or not, the beloved Spyro the Dragon wasn't Insomniac's debut. That title instead goes to Disruptor, a 1996 first-person shooter that in many ways laid the groundwork that Insomniac would build upon over its next 30-plus games. Though this project flopped commercially and almost put the new studio out of business after just one game, critics often praised it as one of the best Doom clones on the PS1. A Doom clone, huh? Well, I may not be super versed in classic Doom, but I think I know just the guy who could help out.
What's up? My name is Nico, and I think that Doom Eternal on easy difficulty is harder than Bloodborne.
No, Nico, not you. Wait, did you say that you think Doom Eternal is harder than Bloodborne? No, I don't even care. Now's not the time to have that conversation. I'll take care of that another day. Maybe. Where's Trav?
What's up?
There we go. That's better.
So I suppose we should each talk about our histories with Insomniac and Doom before we begin. While I never really got into the latter, I've said 1,000 times by now that I'm a Ratchet Clank guy, and Insomniac has consistently put out some of my favorite games since I was first exposed to them almost 2 decades ago. Disruptor was a game I'd actually been seeking out for years until I finally found a copy in great condition at Too Many Games back when conventions existed. It even still has the voted #1 shooter sticker that came on the jewel case with some copies of the game.
While I don't have a ton of experience with Insomniac, it's hard to miss them when you grew up in the era of GameStop selling PS2 games. While I've dabbled in the Spyros and the new Spider-Mans, I missed out on classics like Ratchet and Clank, and I'm itching to dive deeper into their library. Some I actually own and just haven't gotten around to. But while I haven't played many of Insomniac's games, I have played a ton of Doom. Classic Doom, Doom 2, a bit of Final Doom, Doom 3, the other better Doom 3, 2016, Eternal, Doom mods, WADs, snap maps, you name it. So when Kevin informed me about Insomniac's crack at a Doom clone, I had to take that IGN portal over here just to see what it's like.
Wait, what's an IGN portal?
If you told me that Disruptor was an unapologetic Doom clone, I would absolutely believe you. Playing the first few levels, I swore that it was using the same id Tech 1 engine that the early Doom games ran on, or at the very least, the build engine. But as it turns out, that's not the case. Almost everything that makes up Disruptor was built in-house by Insomniac, the biggest giveaway being platforms you can move under, something impossible with the id Tech 1 engine, and a little bit complicated with the build engine.
And not only was this engine built in-house by Insomniac, they had to do it twice because Disruptor was originally designed for the Panasonic 3DO. At the time, 3DO development kits were really cheap compared to the pricey PS1 dev kits, and Insomniac, as a brand new team, obviously didn't have much money yet. While developing Disruptor, Insomniac CEO Ted Price pitched the game to just about every publisher in the industry hoping for funding and, of course, platform support. And they were turned down by each and every one until they were signed by their very last shot, Universal Interactive. This was thanks to the keen eye of one man, Mark Cerny, who would soon thereafter become the president of Universal's gaming division. Cerny was instrumental both in the development of Disruptor and of Insomniac itself, as well as Insomniac's future sibling studio, a little company by the name of Naughty Dog. You may have heard of them. In case you're unfamiliar with Cerny's work, he's an industry legend at this point, having worked on everything from Sonic 2 to Knack 2, to being one of the chief architects of both the PS4 and the PS5 hardware. So having this mind actively assisting Insomniac with development was monumental for the studio. With Cerny's help, and with the 3DO already a clear failure by 1995, Insomniac was able to procure one of those fancy-schmancy PS1 dev kits, and within a month the team had ported the entire game over from scratch.
Disruptor launched exclusively to the PS1 in November 1996, the same year that the first Quake hit shelves, and it bombed. While reviews were positive of the game, players never really latched onto it, and if not for Universal and Cerny loving the game and seeing Insomniac's potential, that probably would have been it for the studio. Instead, Universal suggested aiming for a wider appeal, resulting in Spyro the Dragon hitting store shelves 2 years later. So that was a pretty good call. Though I'm not the right person to ask for that, I haven't played Spyro 1 since I was forced to write cursive in grade school.
Although nowadays Disruptor seems to be looked at mostly as a learning experience by those within Insomniac, I think I'd argue it's a bit more than that. It's the foundation from which just about every subsequent Insomniac game has been built. There are pieces of Disruptor in Spyro, in Ratchet, in Resistance, and even in Spider-Man, and now that I've been able to go back and see this firsthand, it's fascinating. We'll touch on all of that good stuff in a moment though. First, let's talk about this game's hilariously bad, so bad it's good story. In Disruptor, you take control of Jack Curtis, a character so bland that I had to look his name up just to write this sentence. Jack is a Lightstormer space marine, traveling through the solar system to protect humanity's colonies from space bandits, and working under his commanding officer, who's also his brother.
These cutscenes happen at the start of every level, and they're just so awkward that it's hard not to laugh at them. Their main goal is to break down the upcoming level, which they rarely do. Good job, guys. They also act as a way to highlight your new psionic abilities that Jack receives every couple of levels. But more often than not, I completely miss the dialogue cue, and feel pleasantly, or unpleasantly surprised whenever I see a new psionic ability show up in my psionics bar. The dialogue referencing your new powers are sprinkled between stilted dialogue, bad acting that feels like it's right out of a porno.
Security's been wiped out and I'm 50 clicks from the nearest teleporter. We need someone to get in here, kick ass, and get the core shut down ASAP before it goes to meltdown.
What might be a Fisher-Price toy phone, and of course an IGN teleporter.
Holy shit, you weren't kidding. Those are just straight up the IGN logo.
Yeah, be careful though. Those portals make your reviews as bland as possible.
Wait, what'd you just say? I didn't hear that. Whatever, I'm gonna go see what's on the other side.
Arkham Asylum makes you feel like you're Batman.
Alright, don't worry, he'll snap out of that in a second. You should have seen what happened the first time I used one of those. The strangest thing about these cutscenes is that they were directed by Catherine Hardwicke, who you might know as the woman who directed Twilight. Yeah, that explains a lot.
That's why you've always got to keep your eyes open. And watch your ass.
Oh God, what hit me? Those teleporters hurt, man. They're like the Dark Souls of teleporters or something. Ouch. Disruptor's gameplay is thankfully nothing like its story scenes in that it's fun for the right reasons. What's more, the game feels very ahead of its time in some ways. Oh, it's going down my back. Oh, that hurts. In just the second mission, you've got water currents that move Jack as he's standing in a canal, different enemies that are affected differently by your weapon types, and, in classic Insomniac fashion, a handful of unique
kick-ass
guns. The mission after that features a hostage situation where you can accidentally shoot the wrong robots and suffer a minor, non-mission ending penalty. Later on, there are missions where you have no weapons at all and can only use your psionics, and near the end of the game is our absolute favorite, a thrilling time sequence where you have to sprint through an exploding nuclear reactor, trying to disarm it room by room and adding precious seconds to your low escape timer.
Seriously, the timing in this mission is insanely precise. Even though the level is a measly 3 minutes long, it's gonna take a few tries before you really have an idea of how quickly you just gotta move. And as a result, it was one of my favorite levels in the entire game. Failure can be frustrating in this mission, sure, but instead it's more of a learning experience where I knew what I did wrong. Every jump, shot, and corridor sears into your memory, and you'll inch further and further with each attempt until it all comes together and leaves you with that sweet adrenaline high. After spending the entire game killing every enemy in sight, it's a fantastic change of pace to force you to ignore the dozens of baddies around you and just get out by the skin of your teeth. I kinda wish more of the game had this sense of urgency. While most levels aren't that long, some of the more open ones can drag and get repetitive to the point where they overstay their welcome.
While we're on the subject of having to retry levels, let's talk about this game's interesting checkpoint and save system. First off, kudos to Insomniac, you can both save your progress to a memory card and use a password to track your progress. Remember, this was just a year after the PS1 launched in North America. Many players and unknowing parents had no idea that games wouldn't be able to save on their own like they did in the past on cartridge-based consoles. Having both options here is incredibly considerate and pretty rare for the era as far as I've seen. On top of this, most levels feature at least one checkpoint, and in lieu of a traditional lives counter, when you reach that checkpoint, you have 3 retries from that point. If you fail 3 times, you start just that level over from the beginning, not the entire game. Considering how brutally difficult, dare I even say unfair that Disruptor can be at times, its checkpoints are very forgiving, and I appreciate that.
Ammo can be incredibly scarce in many of its levels, which on the one hand pushes you to keep rotating through your arsenal of weapons, but on the other hand, it pushes you to use your psionics as well. This is an early example of the game letting you fight with both regular weapons and PSI abilities simultaneously, and it's kind of a shame that it tries to make you choose one or the other in most cases. Some of the psionics you get include a health restore, which is incredibly useful because you're definitely gonna need it, a shock ability, a blast attack, a shield, and a move that drains PSI energy out of enemies. Considering you'll rarely find energy out in the wild, drain ends up being your best friend if you want to use your psionics at all. Do you want to save your energy to heal, or do you want to wipe out enemies even faster, but risk needing health later? It's a nice balance, and overall the psionics add a unique wrinkle to what could have otherwise been a generic Doom clone. Though I wish PSI energy dropped from enemies without the drain ability, having to switch to the drain psionic kinda hurts the flow of the game. If they for whatever reason remaster this game, which they won't, they need to give drain a dedicated button. Also, it's kinda jarring that some enemies even use the same stock sound effects as Doom's imps. Actually, the pulse rifle uses the same sound effects as Mega Man X5's menu. That's kinda weird.
How did you find a way to sneak Mega Man into this too? The pulse rifle and a couple other guns have some neat secondary effects as well. Any of the game's plasma weapons can be modified with high-frequency rounds that will grant them much more damage, for example. The shotgun can be charged by holding down the trigger, which eats up 2 shells, but absolutely destroys most enemies in the resulting blast. Later on, there's a grenade launcher that fires homing shots, which feels very much like a prototype Ratchet weapon, and 2 one-shot only unauthorized weapons that you can find in super secret areas. It wouldn't be an Insomniac game without some insane gadgets after all. These weapons are the Plasma Lance, which fires a massive laser that just straight up kills everything, and the Zodiac, which is this game's BFG, a screen-clearing weapon. To some of you, the name Zodiac may sound familiar, and no, I'm not talking about Ted Cruz. I'm referring to the Zodiac Mark II from Ratchet Clank Going Commando, that game's ultimate weapon based on its predecessor here. Really, there's a lot of Disruptor's DNA to be found in a series like Ratchet, but this game's influence feels prevalent everywhere through Insomniac's later games. Composer David Bergeau wrote the soundtrack for Disruptor, and themes like Antarctica's feel like they're ripped straight out of the Ratchet games that he would later bring to life. The game allows you to double tap the select weapon button to alternate back and forth between your last 2 most recently used weapons, again, something that Ratchet & Clank and the Spider-Man games would later expand upon. Really, I kinda wish they would have thought to implement RNC's weapon wheel concept into Disruptor all those years earlier. This vertical menu for selecting weapons and psionics just isn't very conducive to the fast-paced gameplay and on-the-fly mid-combat adjustments. And for obvious reasons, I'm not going to draw too many comparisons between Disruptor and Insomniac's PS3 shooter series Resistance. Honestly, Resistance sometimes feels like it was Insomniac wanting to go back and prove that they could make an FPS game that performs well commercially, and they succeeded, at least for the first game. The other 2 are a bit more debatable. Maybe one day down the road I'll dive into that series here on the channel. If that's something you want to see, let me know. Even some of our criticisms here almost feel like the team tripped, realized they stumbled, and immediately course-corrected for future projects. The draw distance in Disruptor, for example, isn't good. It's not historically bad or anything, but it's about what you'd expect for a PS1 game, and that's kind of part of the problem here. I think part of this short field of view is due to the impressive quality of the game's textures, which don't warp when you get near them like many of Disruptor's PS1 contemporaries. Some compromises certainly had to be made, and while I don't know that sacrificing draw distance would have been the right call, I can understand it, and it led to a historic development just a couple years later. Spyro, thanks to Mark Cerny and Insomniac programmer Alex Hastings, innovated one of the first uses of LOD, or level of detail, on consoles, or at least on the PS1. By transitioning between a higher quality model and a simpler one at longer distances, developers like Insomniac could optimize their games even better to the hardware without sacrificing draw distance. In essence, without Disruptor's struggles, LOD might have arrived even later than it already did on PS1. In a much smaller and completely unrelated issue, most elevator doors, for some reason, no matter what you do, open behind you, which leads to enemies getting some potshots in before you can fight back. Ratchet & Clank would fix this by incorporating elevators that rotated, implicitly guiding you to the right exit.
Really, the only criticism that didn't lead to some direct changes in future Insomniac games is its difficulty, but even then, those future games were much easier, and those with weapons offered much more plentiful stocks of ammo. The middle chunk of Disruptor just drags, with several long levels in a row that overstay their welcome. That said, it is still amazing with how much level variety there is here, with completely different locales and enemies between missions, and I'm honestly kind of blown away at how often this game uses verticality. But in that same breath, I can't help but wish that these were broken up a bit more. Even with the convenient map overlay that you could just pop onto your screen, the levels sometimes get labyrinthian or just flat out repeat themselves.
The late-game Prison Break level is a good microcosm of this game's issues. It's incredibly difficult, to say ammo is scarce is an understatement, and most of it is just you walking down similar iterations of empty roads, hoping that enemies that you can't see due to the draw distance don't somehow start seeing and start shooting at you. Even still, you do leave this mission feeling an absolute thrill regardless of how many retries it may take you. It's actually an incredibly effective spin on the get all your weapons back level trope. If health were just a little bit more available, I would say it could have been one of my favorite versions of that mission type.
I'll admit, I abused save states during this level and at a few other points during the adventure, because missing even a couple of shots could be enough to doom you. It just becomes too much at some points, though I blame that on controlling an FPS with a D-pad. To be fair, I didn't know that there were cheats. I probably would have just used those instead if I knew.
Yeah, for as much as we're praising this game and noting how much it inspired later Insomniac games, I would only recommend you play Disruptor using some of the cheats. There are many points where the game just gets flat out unfair, and as neat as this game is, it's simply not worth it to repeat the levels over and over and over and over and over again. I think you're better off just getting in, beating it in 2 to 3 hours, and getting out admiring what a neat little game it is. The only cheats I tried to use throughout my playthrough were the health and ammo refill ones, and only when I would run especially low on either on levels that I'd already tried in full and gotten a game over on at least once or twice before. Since your ammo resets after every level, it's not like you can stockpile between missions, and Disruptor really wants you to make every single shot count. These two codes alone make the experience so much more manageable and, more importantly, so much more enjoyable. I have no doubt that I could have beaten Disruptor without them, but at a certain point, it's just not worth the hassle. I'll happily take the game making fun of me in the credits over slogging through Antarctica for another hour. If you find that you're especially struggling, there's an infinite health code as well, but that just takes away all the fun. Except on the second Psionics only level. Fuck this level.
Even if the controls were just a tad better, the game might not even warrant needing those cheats. They're not bad controls, but it's really tough to go back and play this with a controller without wishing you had dual-stick aiming. Strafing can only get you so far when the enemies have attacks that'll chip your health down faster than you can train a good shot at them. Also, while you're at it, make sure that you change the camera sway to the lighter setting. It's much easier to aim when your character isn't furiously bouncing up and down with each step.
So is Disruptor a good game worthy of all the praise it received almost 25 years ago? Yeah, I would say it's a really fun time.
It definitely stands out as one of the better, or at least unique Doom clones that I've played. And I've played a lot of them in the last couple of years.
But even more than that, this game is almost a sort of playable museum piece. Without Disruptor's successes and its many shortcomings, Insomniac doesn't become the world-renowned studio that it is today. Because of that, I'm really glad I finally played Disruptor, and I'm elated that it's in my collection now. It would have been neat to see Insomniac attempt some sort of split-screen multiplayer here, but given the smaller scope of the game and the whole rebuild from scratch thing, I get why it's not implemented. There is, for some reason, a practice mode where you can replay the first 5 levels to get better at them, but I don't really know why you'd want to practice only the first 5. That's kind of weird.
To me, it's just so awesome to see the seeds that were planted here in Disruptor that would bloom years or even decades down the road in other Insomniac projects, and to see that the DNA of this studio after all of these years hasn't changed a single bit. And to think, none of it may have happened without the 3DO having such a cheap development kit and then also being a complete failure of a system, which may be the only positive thing I will ever have to say about the 3DO. What about you, Trav?
It took me a bit to really get into Disruptor, but after a while, I actually quite enjoyed it, and I'm actually kind of excited to go out and try all these other games that Insomniac has done. By the way, was it you who gave me these at Too Many Games?
Alright, look, I'm gonna level with you here. If you don't review Ratchet Clank this year, I'm going to find you, hunt you down, abduct your family, and subject them to the absolute worst YouTubers that I can find online. And no,
okay, hey, Kevin, why don't you go look over there? It's an IGN portal. It'll do you real good. It'll go too much water.
Okay, how did that get into the studio? Fuck.
Look, I'm not saying that Bloodborne isn't a hard game, but I think that Doom Eternal, even on easy mode, is way too hard. They just kept throwing demons at you and throwing demons at you and throwing demons at you. And then your chainsaw doesn't work the same way it did in 2016. And then you have to like learn the mechanics and you have to like read a whole novel in order to be able to know what you're doing. Whereas with Bloodborne, everything's pretty clear cut. You press circle, you press R1. You press circle, you press R1. And you keep doing that over and over again until you win. Whereas with Doom Eternal, it's just, there's too much platforming. Like, if I wanted to play a platformer, I would play a Mario game. Doom Eternal shouldn't be a Mario game. I don't like the fact that they made the Doom guy so much bigger, and then they just have him zip-zopping around like it's nothing. And that just kind of bothers me.